Pitcairn Island, often erroneously called Pitcairn's Island, is actually one island in a group of four collectively known as the Pitcairn Islands. It is a British overseas territory. Its sovereign is King Charles III of the United Kingdom, and its local government is a representative democracy under a constitution adopted in 2010. Of the four islands, O&O, Ducie, Henderson, and Pitcairn, only the latter is inhabited, with a population of less than 50. Over half of those are direct descendants of the mutineers who perpetrated one of the most famous crimes in the history of the sea. The mutineers from His Majesty's armed vessel Bounty sought refuge and a peaceful existence on Pitcairn in 1790, bringing with them 6 Polynesian men and 11 women. In less than a decade, all but one of the men and 2 of the women were dead, victims of murder, suicide, illness, and accidents. Their story, and the story of their descendants, is the final chapter in the saga of the mutiny on the Bounty, and one part of the story still shrouded with mystery, folklore, and myth. When the island Refuge was discovered by an American whaling ship in 1807, only one survivor of the crew of the Bounty remained, and his story of what happened on the Bounty before the mutiny and to its mutinous crew afterward changed with each retelling. Today, the Pitcairn Islands, located in one of the most remote spots on Earth, is the smallest representative democracy in the world. It sits over 1,300 miles, more than 2,100 kilometers to the southeast of Tahiti. It produces some products for trade, including a highly desired honey, which is reportedly favored by the British royal family and is a popular spot for tourists. Yet it is remembered chiefly for its role in the romantic tale of the mutiny on the high seas and the tragic tale of what befell its participants. Welcome back to Geographics. I'm your host, Eric Malachite, and today's script was provided by Larry Holsworth, so be sure to show them some love as you deploy your likes and do all the things that help keep the eldritch beast that is the YouTube algorithm going. Let's get to it. Researchers and archaeologists have discovered evidence that Pitcairn Island, the second largest of the island group, had Polynesian settlements as early as the 11th century, which continued into the early 16th. What happened to the settlements is unknown. They may have been wiped out by disease or intertribal warfare, or they may have been simply abandoned. Prior to contact with the Europeans, the Polynesians were accomplished navigators and sailors, ranging among the many archipelagos of the South and Central Pacific in large dugout outrigger canoes driven by paddles and sails made of bark cloth. Warfare was also common, as various tribal chieftains sought to expand their realms, acquiring wealth via land, slaves, and women. With warfare came allies, and with allies trade. Evidence of such activity on Pitcairn exists long before the arrival of the Bounty. Members of the Bounty's crew found evidence themselves in the form of arrowheads, religious carvings, and other relics. Yet, there was no such evidence visible to the crew of His Majesty's ship Swallow when it sighted the island on July 3, 1767. A young midshipman by the name of Robert Pitcairn was the first to espy the island, and the commander of HMS Swallow, Philip Carteret, bestowed the midshipman's last name upon the new discovery. Young Pitcairn's name would loom large in American and British history just 8 years later. It was Robert's father, Marine Captain John Pitcairn, who led British troops onto Lexington Green on the morning of April 19, 1775, resulting in the first shots of the American Revolutionary War. The elder Pitcairn later died in the assault on Bunker Hill. Captain Carteret approached as near as he dared to the new discovery, but noting the heavy surf around its cliffs and rocky shores, opted not to send a landing party to explore. Citing absence of smoke or any evidence of human activity, he observed the island seemed to be uninhabited, though lush with vegetation. He noted the latitude and longitude of the island in his log and continued about his business, departing the area while it was still daylight. Carteret accurately recorded the island's latitude, but due to the lack of accurate chronometers aboard, his report of the discovery's longitude was incorrect. In 1773, the highly capable navigator and explorer James Cook attempted to find and explore Pitcairn Island, only to discover that the island wasn't where Carteret had said it was. British naval charts of the Pacific were then incomplete and often inaccurate, and though Pitcairn appeared on them at latitude 25 degrees 2 seconds south, longitude 133 degrees 21 seconds west, ships arriving at that location found only empty sea. In 1776, James Cook made his third and final voyage of discovery to the Pacific. Among the members of the expedition was William Bligh, master of the ship Resolution, who enhanced his already formidable navigating skills at the hands of James Cook. Among the books and charts Bligh collected during his voyage with Cook were the reports of Carteret describing Pitcairn Island, Cook's own report, which indicated the island wasn't where Carteret claimed, and his attempts to find and record the actual location of the island. These reports, enhanced by Bligh's own research and commentaries, were later carried aboard the Bounty when Bligh commanded that ship on its voyage to Tahiti. It was then that Fletcher Christian, serving as a master's mate and later acting lieutenant, learned of the existence of the lost island. How much planning went into the mutiny which deprived William Bligh of his command of the Bounty remains uncertain. Some tellers of the tale claim Christian's actions were based on an impulse, while others claim a conspiracy that included Fletcher Christian, but was actually suggested by midshipman Ned Young. In the mutiny, Bligh and 19 loyalists were cast adrift in an open boat, given some supplies and few charts, and abandoned to sea. Having dispensed with Bligh, the mutineers were by no means in agreement as to what should be done next. Several sailors remained aboard, having taken no part in the mutiny. It was their expressed desire to return to Tahiti, where they knew that eventually a British ship would come looking for them. Several of the mutineers wished to return to Tahiti as well, believing they would be able to hide in the hills or on other nearby islands to avoid the inevitable pursuit. Accordingly, Christian sailed to Tahiti, replenished supplies, took aboard several Polynesians, and sailed away again in search of a refuge somewhere in the Pacific. Attempts to find a suitable spot failed for numerous reasons, including, in some cases, resistance from natives. There was also considerable grumbling among the mutineers and non-mutineers, many of whom wished to remain in Tahiti. Eventually, Christian returned to Tahiti once more, disembarked those who did not wish to vanish into the Pacific, and then left again, never to return. Accompanying him were 8 mutineers, 6 Polynesian men, and 11 women, some of whom had been brought aboard against their will, which sucks. By then, Christian had a definite plan. He would seek a fertile, uninhabited island, with no easy landing spot for ships' boats, away from the established trade routes. From his studies of Bligh's books and charts left aboard Bounty, he knew of Pitcairn Island. All he had to do was find it. Christian assumed that Carteret's latitude for the island was more or less correct. He planned to sail south to reach the latitude and then east, tacking against the prevailing winds, zigzagging across the line of latitude until he spotted the erroneously charted island. And so he did, for over 2 months as the Bounty deteriorated and the crew grew more and more restless. Finally, in January 1798, months after the mutiny that made Christian and his followers criminal fugitives, they rediscovered Pitcairn Island, more than 330 kilometers or 210 miles east of where the British Navy's charts indicated. After relieving the Bounty of everything the mutineers believed would be useful, the ship was run up on the rocks in a small inlet they dubbed Bounty Bay. It was then burned, though whether by deliberate arson or accident is uncertain. Portions of the wreck are still visible. Among the items removed from the ship before its destruction was the ship's Bible. The Bible has its own history of travels beyond Pitcairn, including to Connecticut, Washington, D.C., London, England, and finally back to Pitcairn, where it is encased in a small museum display. Before its travels, it figured prominently in the Pitcairn settlement. At first, the community of seamen and Polynesians prospered. Crops grew well in the fertile soil, pigs carried in the Bounty roamed freely, multiplied, and provided a source of meat. Fish and birds added to the food supply. Fresh water was sourced in seasonal springs, and Christian had cisterns built to capture and retain rainwater as well. The settlers built homes of wood and thatch in the Tahitian fashion and made clothes from bark, hats from leaves, and moccasins from plants to protect their feet. Some of the men, including Christian, had regular consorts they referred to their wives. Others shared the remaining women among several men. Yeah, I don't like where this is going. And inevitably, children began to appear, with most of the Englishmen giving their children as well as their consorts English names. When Christian's first child was born to his wife Mauatua, whom he called Isabella, he named the boy Thursday October Christian. A subsequent son was given the more conventional name of Charles, and a later daughter was named Mary. During the early years of the settlement, the gardens, game, and other results of their shared labors were shared communally. There was nothing in the way of private property other than the homes. The island juts out of the sea abruptly, with steep cliffs presenting imposing obstacles to landing from the water. Only a small area above Bounty Bay offered sufficient level ground for the construction of a settlement. It was there that the mutineers built their houses and support buildings, including a blacksmith's forge and storage sheds for food. The rest of the island above the bluffs presented some steeply rolling country, which was exceptionally fertile. The settlers cleared woods and planted yams, breadfruit, citrus fruits, maize, and other crops brought with them from Tahiti and other South Sea islands they had visited in their search. To Christian and his fellow Englishmen, the island presented a new beginning, a new hope, and a way of life none of the seamen had known before. To the rest of the world, Fletcher Christian and the infamous bounty mutineers had escaped the long arm of the law. They had successfully vanished into the vast Pacific. On February 6, 1808, the American sailing ship Topaz approached Pitcairn. Its captain, Mayhew Folger, carefully studied the perimeter of the small island, searching for both seals and for a suitable place to land a party to obtain both water and firewood. As Topaz edged closer to the island, 2 canoes appeared, steering boldly toward the ship. In the canoes were young men, teenagers, who, to Folger's astonishment, hailed the ship in English before climbing over the side. The islanders identified themselves as Englishmen, and when Folger replied that he was an American, they responded by asking where America was and whether it was in Ireland. To Folger's growing amazement, they claimed to be the son of someone they identified as Alec. When Folger stated that he did not know Alec, the islanders responded with a question. They asked the American if he knew Captain Bligh of His Majesty's ship Bounty. With that stunning question, Folger knew he had stumbled upon the answer to a mystery then 2 decades old. The question of what had happened to the mutineers from the Bounty had been answered. The young islanders took the American ashore to meet Alec. There, the mutineer identified himself as Alexander Smith, late able seaman aboard the Bounty, whose real name was John Adams. Adams was the sole survivor of the Bounty's crew, living on Pitcairn as the patriarch of a small community of Polynesian women and numerous children of mixed races and varying ages. The story of Adams related to Folger was one of several different tales he would subsequently tell of the fate of the Bounty mutineers. In some, he claimed Christian had been murdered in a day of general bloodletting about 4 years after the mutineers arrived at Pitcairn. In another, he claimed Christian had committed suicide by throwing himself into the sea from the rocky cliffs, driven insane by isolation and shame. Yet another had Christian dying of an undetermined illness. The generally accepted tale, one which has been amplified in literature and film, was that the Polynesians, fed up with forced servitude and the Englishmen's seizure of their women, had risen up and killed several of the mutineers, including Christian. Before they could complete the extermination of the mutineers, the women, led by Mauatua and Susanna, the consort of Ned Young, had killed the Polynesian men as they slept. 4 Englishmen survived the bloodletting, 2 of whom died shortly afterwards, one by suicide, the other murdered by Young and Adams. By 1795, only Adams and Young remained of the Bounty mutineers. In the peace which followed, Young used Bounty's Bible to teach Adams to read and write. Young died from asthma around 1800. Subsequently, Adams used the same Bible to educate the community, which continued to grow through inbreeding. Inbreeding. Again, I do not like where this is going. For example, Thursday October Christian, one of the young men who had greeted Folger, later married Susanna, widow of Ned Young. She gave birth to several children, including one they named Thursday October Christian II, who later married Mary Young, granddaughter of Ned Young. Yet all that was still in the future at the time of Folger's visit. The American stayed only a few hours, and when he departed, he carried with him the chronometer, which had been carried aboard the Bounty during its historic voyage. Folger announced his discovery to the world at Valparaiso, Chile, at the end of September 1808. The chronometer, which had been registered by Bligh at the British Admiralty prior to the voyage, confirmed the truth of the tale. The destination of the Bounty mutineers had been found, but their true fate had not. It remained shrouded in romance, mystery, and speculation. Yet, there was no denying the existence of a mixed race, English-speaking Christian community existing on one of the most isolated islands on Earth. That community remains to the present day, though its history has proven as strange and dramatic at times as its creation over 2 centuries ago. In 1814, 2 British men of war in the Pacific to protect the British whaling fleet from American depredations during the War of 1812 stopped at Pitcairn. They had no instructions from the British government regarding the presence of the sole surviving Bounty mutineer. The ship's captains were as astonished at the peaceful community as Folger had been, and reported a settlement which included John Adams, 10 Polynesian women, and 23 children. Both captains wrote reports praising Adams's character and his role in the community. Based on their reports as well as those of the others, the British Admiralty decided not to prosecute Adams for mutiny. By then, Bounty Captain William Bligh's reputation had undergone a change as well. Where Bligh had once been regarded as a superb seaman, navigator, and leader, he was then widely and unfairly considered a cruel and sadistic tyrant. Based on public opinion and the romantic image of a utopian community in the South Sea, the Admiralty closed the case on the last bounty mutineer. With the end of the War of 1812, British trade in the Pacific increased steadily, with ships bound to and from Australia and India stopping at Pitcairn to replenish water and trade with the Pitcairners. The community grew steadily, reaching a population in the mid-60s by 1823. Adams came to realize that the population would eventually outgrow the island's ability to sustain them. He used the visits of ships, both merchantmen and warships of the Royal Navy, to communicate with authorities in Britain, requesting a replacement for himself as the head of the community and recognition of the island as a British colony. Several new faces arrived during the 1820s, including missionaries and school teachers. They too established families. The growing children intermarried as they came of age, and eventually their children did as well. Coming of age at the time was 14 or 15. By the late 1820s, Adams was routinely lobbying the British government to relocate the settlement. In 1829, John Adams died at the age of 62. In 1831, the British government decided to relocate the small settlement, and the entire population was relocated to Tahiti. There, the Pitcairners grew increasingly unhappy, and before the year was out, they made arrangements to return to the Refuge, where the mutineers had landed so many years before. In 1832, a new arrival to the island, Joshua Hill, announced he represented the British government and established himself as the head of the island, with the self-imposed title as President of the Commonwealth. His dictatorial reign grated on the islanders, and in 1838 he was deposed, with the first written constitution for the community created with the assistance of Captain Elliot of the visiting ship HMS Fly. The new constitution granted suffrage to every native born on the island, male or female, who shall have attained the age of 18 years. Signed on November 30th, 1838, it marked the formal entry of Pitcairn Island into the British Empire. It also marked the first written acknowledgement of female suffrage in the history of the British Empire. Don't think that this story is going to get much better than that. In 1856, the entire settlement was relocated again due to the growth of the population having exceeded the island's resources. The 194 settlers were removed by the British government to Norfolk Island, a former Persian colony then abandoned and uninhabited. As in the previous attempt, the new home proved an unhappy one for many, and beginning in 1859, several of the families began to return to Pitcairn, including the Christians and the Youngs. Some of the male lines of the founding mutineers had by then died out, and another family, the Warrens, descended from the American settlers from the 1820s, grew in prominence. Inevitably, as the world around Pitcairn changed, the changes were felt in the community. Steamships replaced the sailing vessels of old. The islanders, concerned about the unwanted influence of new settlers, passed laws restricting immigration. Visiting missionaries from the United States gradually reduced the influence of the Church of England, replacing it with the tenets of the Seventh-day Adventists. And that's a red flag. The Seventh-day Adventists imposed the dietary restrictions of their faith, which led to the wholesale slaughter of pigs on the island, since consumption of pork is considered taboo, along with fun. Fun is outlawed as well. School curricula was revised to reflect the new morality, as was the legal code, which created new penalties for crimes such as adultery and wife-beating. The second one, that's a good thing, both of which had been widely practiced by the original settlers. In 1914, changes to the outside world led to the biggest change yet for Pitcairn. The opening of the Panama Canal placed the island alongside the direct route for ships using the canal on voyages to and from New Zealand and Australia. Where visiting ships had once been hit or miss, often with many, many months in between, they became an almost weekly event. The site of the original settlement on Pitcairn is today the site of the community of Adamstown, officially the capital of the islands. However, the administrative center for the islands is in Auckland, New Zealand. As of 2023, less than 40 people are considered permanent residents of Pitcairn, nearly all of whom are descendants of the Bounty mutineers, and nearly all of whom reside in Adamstown. The grave of John Adams / Alexander Smith is located on a rise overlooking the town, the only known final resting place of a bounty mutineer. For better or worse, it is venerated, as Adams is considered to be the father of the community of Pitcairn Island, the grave of Fletcher Christian, who led the mutineers to their refuge, and ultimately their fate has never been found. Not all generations of Pitcairners venerate Adams. There are those who consider him a serial liar and murderer who, along with Ned Young, overthrew Christian as they had once overthrown Bligh. Throughout its existence, conflicting histories, maintained and modified by spoken tradition, have created stories about the ultimate fates of the mutineers. One such history, unconfirmed by any discovered ship's log, contends that the island was visited by a ship or ships years before the arrival of Folger in the Topaz. Some believe that Christian escaped the island on such a ship and eventually made his way back to England, leaving his wife and children behind. In the 21st century, the island has been the site of several instances of children. I told you, this story doesn't get better. In 2004, Steve Christian, then mayor of Adamstown and a direct descendant of the bounty mutineer, was convicted, along with 5 other men, of child and rape, including of his own children. After serving his sentence, he remained on the island and in 2016 served as a court official during the trial of Mike Warren of Pitcairn. Warren was convicted, after which Christian observed that though he had his own checkered past, he had never done anything like that sort of stuff. And for those of you who want a deeper look into that story, I encourage you to check out the NPR article, which will be linked in the pinned comment and the description. Thank you. Today, Pitcairn Island boasts fewer than 40 permanent residents. They subsist through agriculture, fishing, sale of souvenirs to tourists, and limited trade. The declining population, particularly of working-age people, has led the Pitcairn government to encourage migration to the island, though with limited success. Tourists visiting the island can reach it only by sea and must stay in private homes, as no hotels or inns exist on the island. Modern society has made inroads on the island, with internet service, solar power, and other conveniences unimaginable by the brigands which landed there in 1790. Yet the island is still, nearly 240 years after the bounty mutineers arrive, almost unimaginably remote, just as Fletcher Christian had hoped it would be. Its past is a grim and bloody story, its future completely uncertain. Both remain shrouded in mystery. I hope you learned something today, and if you enjoyed this video, be sure to deploy your likes, comment to a historical place we haven't covered yet, subscribe and ring that bell, and share this video with someone who loves learning about history's most important locations. I'm Eric Malachite, and we'll see you next time.